What happens when one of Hollywood's most legendary actors sits down for what should be a routine morning talk show appearance, only to find himself in the middle of a verbal battlefield that would leave everyone speechless? Today we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had Harrison Ford walking off the View set, leaving the host scrambling and viewers at home picking their jaws up off the floor. This is a story about respect, Hollywood politics, and what happens when two strong personalities refuse to back down. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York. Harrison Ford had been booked for what his publicist assured him would be a light promotional interview for his latest project. The legendary actor, known for his no-nonsense approach both on and off screen, arrived early and was immediately escorted to the green room where he sat quietly, reviewing his talking points. "Mr. Ford, we're so excited to have you on the show today," chirped one of the production assistants as she poured him coffee. "The ladies are really looking forward to this." Harrison nodded politely, though those who knew him well would recognize the slight tension in his jaw. He had done countless interviews over his decades-long career, but daytime television had always felt like navigating a minefield. Too many hosts seemed more interested in creating moments than having genuine conversations. Meanwhile, in the main studio, the hosts were going through their final preparations. Whoopi Goldberg sat at her familiar spot at the head of the table, coffee in hand, scanning through her notes with the intensity of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Joy Behar was cracking jokes with the crew, her energy already high despite the early hour. Sarah Haynes was methodically organizing her research cards, while Alyssa Farah Griffin and Sunny Hostin engaged in quiet conversation about the morning's hot topics. "All right, ladies, we've got Harrison Ford coming up in segment 3, announced the floor director. "Remember, we want to keep it light and fun. This is promotional, not political." Whoopi looked up from her notes with a slight smirk. "When have we ever not kept things fun?" she said, causing Joy to snort with laughter. "That's what I'm afraid of," muttered Sarah under her breath, though not quietly enough to avoid Sunny's sharp ears. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sunny asked, her eyebrows raised. Nothing. I just think we should remember he's here to promote his work, not debate current events," Sarah replied diplomatically. Whoopi's expression hardened slightly. "Last I checked, this was still The View, not entertainment tonight. If Mr. Ford can't handle a real conversation, maybe he shouldn't have agreed to come on." The tension in the room was palpable, but before anyone could respond further, the stage manager called for places. The show's signature theme music began to play, and the cameras rolled to life. "Good morning and welcome back to The View," Whoopi announced with her trademark authoritative tone. "We're joined today by a true Hollywood legend, the man who brought us Han Solo and Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford." The audience erupted in applause as Harrison walked onto the set, his stride confident but his smile measured. He shook hands with each host, offering polite greetings, though viewers at home might have noticed the brief moment of hesitation when he reached Whoopi. "Harrison, welcome to the show." Joy beamed as he took his seat. "We're such huge fans. I've probably seen Star Wars about 50 times. "Well, I appreciate that, Joy. Though I have to say, after all these years, I'm still amazed people want to talk about movies I made decades ago," Harrison replied with his characteristic dry humor. "Oh, come on. You love it," Alyssa chimed in, with a grin. "Admit it, there's got to be some part of you that enjoys being Han Solo forever." Harrison chuckled, seeming to relax slightly. "You know, there are worse fates in life than being remembered for playing a character people love. Though I do occasionally wish people would ask me about my carpentry work instead." The table laughed, and for a moment, it seemed like the interview would proceed smoothly. Sarah jumped in with a prepared question about his latest film, and Harrison began sharing an amusing anecdote about working with his co-stars. The conversation flowed naturally, with each host contributing thoughtful questions and genuine reactions to his stories. But Whoopi had been notably quiet, watching Harrison with the intensity of a chess player planning her next move. Those familiar with her interviewing style knew this silence often preceded her most pointed questions. "Harrison," she interjected during a natural pause in the conversation, her tone shifting noticeably. "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me." The other hosts exchanged quick glances. This wasn't part of the planned interview flow, and Sarah particularly looked concerned about where this might be heading. Sure, Whoopi. What's on your mind? Harrison replied, though his body language subtly shifted, his shoulders squaring slightly. Well, you've been in this business for over 50 years, and I'm wondering if you think you've done enough to use your platform responsibly. I mean, we're living in times where celebrities have real influence, and I'm curious about your commitment to social justice causes. The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well would recognize the warning signs, the slight narrowing of his eyes that his directors had learned to watch for during difficult scenes. I think I've always tried to be responsible with whatever influence I might have, Harrison replied carefully. I've supported causes I believe in, both publicly and privately. But I've never felt that being an actor automatically makes me an expert on every social or political issue. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge that made the other hosts shift uncomfortably in their seats. But don't you think that's a privilege talking? The privilege to stay silent while others are fighting for basic human rights. Joy tried to interject with a lighter comment, but Whoopi held up a hand, her eyes never leaving Harrison's face. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't consider it staying silent, Whoopi. I consider it being thoughtful about when and how I use whatever platform I have. Not every issue requires a celebrity opinion. Interesting perspective from someone who's benefited enormously from a system that hasn't always been fair to everyone. Whoopi shot back, her tone now openly confrontational. The other hosts looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sunny attempted to redirect the conversation, but Whoopi wasn't finished. I mean, let's be honest here, Harrison. You've played heroes on screen, but what kind of hero are you in real life when it comes to standing up for what's right? The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in the middle of a duel. Harrison's famous composure was being tested in real time, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature rising. Harrison Ford sat back in his chair, his famous Han Solo smirk completely absent as he processed Whoopi's pointed question about what kind of hero he was in real life. The studio audience, which had been enthusiastically applauding just minutes earlier, now sat in stunned silence, sensing they were witnessing something far more intense than a typical morning show interview. That's quite an assumption, Whoopi, Harrison finally replied, his voice steady, but with an undertone that anyone who had worked with him would recognize as dangerous territory. You seem to think you know what I have or haven't done with my life based on what exactly? What you read in tabloids. Whoopi didn't back down. I'm basing it on what I see, Harrison. I see a man who's had every advantage, every opportunity, and when the world is literally burning around us, you choose to stay quiet. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Joy Behar, clearly sensing the interview spiraling out of control, jumped in with nervous laughter. Okay, let's maybe dial this back a notch. Harrison, tell us about working with the new generation of actors in your latest film. But Harrison's attention remained fixed on Whoopi. You know what tells me about someone's character, Whoopi? When they invite someone onto their show under the pretense of a friendly interview and then ambush them with personal attacks based on assumptions. Personal attacks. Whoopi's voice rose slightly. I asked you a legitimate question about using your platform responsibly. If that feels like an attack, maybe that says more about your conscience than my question. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. As the show's more diplomatic voice, she attempted damage control. I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that we're all curious about how celebrities navigate their public responsibility. No, Sarah, that's not what I'm trying to say. Whoopi interrupted sharply. I'm saying exactly what I mean. We're living in unprecedented times, and I want to know why someone with Harrison's influence chooses to sit on the sidelines. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes flashing with the kind of intensity usually reserved for his most dramatic film roles. Who says I'm sitting on the sidelines? Because I don't tweet my every thought? Because I don't show up at every protest with a camera crew in tow? You have no idea what I do with my time or my money, but you feel qualified to judge my character on national television. Alyssa Farah Griffin, trying to find middle ground, offered. I think there are different ways people can contribute to causes they care about. Some are public, some are private. Exactly, Harrison said, acknowledging Alyssa with a brief nod. But apparently, according to Whoopi, if it's not performative enough for her standards, It doesn't count. Performative. Whoopi's voice cracked. Like a whip. You think standing up for civil rights is performative? You think using your voice for justice is just performance? I think making assumptions about someone's character on television because they don't meet your specific definition of activism is performative as hell. Harrison shot back, his composure finally beginning to slip. The other hosts exchanged alarmed glances. Sonny Hostin, who had been relatively quiet, decided to weigh in. Harrison, I don't think anyone is attacking your character. I think we're just having a discussion about celebrity responsibility in the current climate. Harrison turned to Sonny with barely contained frustration. Sonny, with all due respect, that's not what's happening here. Whoopi didn't ask me about celebrity responsibility. She questioned my integrity, my character, and implied that I'm somehow complicit in injustice because I don't conduct my activism the way she thinks I should. Because you don't conduct it at all, Whoopi interjected coldly. And there it is, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. You've decided, based on absolutely nothing, that I don't conduct it at all. You've appointed yourself judge and jury of my entire life based on what you think you know about me. Joy tried again to lighten the mood. Look, we're all passionate people here, and passion can sometimes come across as confrontational when we don't mean it that way. Oh, I mean it exactly that way, Whoopi said, not taking her eyes off Harrison. I'm confronting the comfort that comes with privilege, the luxury of staying silent when others can't afford to. Harrison stood up abruptly, causing a visible stir throughout the studio. You know what, Whoopi? You want to talk about privilege? Let's talk about the privilege of sitting behind this desk every morning and launching character assassinations. Based on incomplete information, let's talk about the privilege of thinking your activism is the only valid form of activism. Sit down, Harrison, Whoopi commanded, her voice taking on an authoritative tone that had silenced many guests before. No, I don't think I will, Harrison replied, his famous rebellious streak fully activated. I came here as a professional courtesy, to promote my work and have what I was told would be a pleasant conversation. Instead, I find myself being lectured by someone who thinks she has the moral authority to determine who is and isn't doing enough for the world. Sarah made one more attempt at diplomacy. Harrison, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. There's been no misunderstanding, Sarah, Harrison said, though his tone was gentler when addressing her. Whoopi made her intentions perfectly clear. She wanted to grandstand, and she figured a morning show interview would be the perfect platform to do it. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the studio like a gunshot. Don't you dare try to paint me as the villain here, Harrison Ford. I asked you a simple question about using your platform for good, and you turned it into some kind of personal attack because you can't handle being held accountable. Accountable for what? Harrison demanded, his voice rising to match hers. For not living my life according to your specifications? For not performing my values in ways that meet your approval? You don't know the first thing about what I do when the cameras aren't rolling. Then tell us, Whoopi challenged. Right here, right now. Tell us about all this secret activism you're doing. Enlighten us about how wrong we are about your commitment to justice. Harrison paused, staring at her with a look that could have frozen fire. I don't owe you or anyone else a detailed account of my private charitable work or personal convictions. The fact that you think I do speaks volumes about your ego, not my character. Alyssa tried once more to intervene. Maybe we can agree that there are different ways to contribute to society, and we don't all have to approach it the same way. No, Alyssa, Whoopi said firmly. We can't agree on that. Because some ways of contributing actually contribute, and some ways are just excuses for inaction dressed up as principle. The insult hit its mark. Harrison's face flushed, and for a moment, everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if they were about to witness something unprecedented in daytime television history. You know what your problem is, Whoopi? Harrison said, his voice now deadly calm. You've confused being loud with being right, and being righteous with being right. You think because you have strong opinions and you're not afraid to express them, that automatically makes you the moral authority in every room you enter. And you think because you've played heroes in movies, that gives you some kind of pass in real life. Whoopi fired back without missing a beat. No, I think because I've lived my life according to my own principles, not according to what plays well on television, I don't need validation from someone who mistakes judgment for journalism. The temperature in the room had reached a boiling point, and everyone could sense that they were approaching a moment of no return. The studio had become a pressure cooker, and everyone could feel they were seconds away from an explosion that would make television history. Harrison Ford stood behind his chair, his legendary composure hanging by a thread, while Whoopi Goldberg sat defiantly at the head of the table, her eyes blazing with the intensity of someone who had no intention of backing down. Mistakes judgment for journalism? Whoopi repeated, her voice dripping with indignation. Let me tell you something, Harrison Ford. I've been fighting for justice and equality since before you ever stepped foot on a movie set. I've earned the right to ask tough questions, especially to people who have platforms they refuse to use responsibly. There it is again, Harrison said, shaking his head in disgust. You've earned the right. According to who? According to you? You've appointed yourself the arbiter of who's doing enough and who isn't, and anyone who doesn't meet your standards gets publicly shamed on your show. Joy Behar made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Guys, come on, we're all on the same team here. We all want to make the world a better place. No, Joy, we're not all on the same team. Whoopi snapped, not taking her eyes off Harrison. Some of us are actually fighting the fight, and some of us are sitting comfortably in our mansions pretending that staying quiet is some kind of noble principle. Harrison's face went completely stone cold. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but you're so drunk on your own righteousness that you can't see how ignorant you sound. Ignorant. Whoopi's voice rose to a near shout. I'm ignorant for expecting someone with your privilege and platform to use it for something other than selling movie tickets? You're ignorant for thinking that your way is the only way, Harrison fired back. You're ignorant for believing that because someone doesn't perform their activism in the circus you've created here every morning, they must not be doing anything at all. Sarah Haynes looked like she was about to cry. Please, can we just take a breath here? This has gotten way too heated. No, Sarah, it hasn't gotten heated enough, Whoopi declared. I'm tired of celebrities coming on this show, taking the easy questions about their latest projects, and never being held accountable for their silence when the world needs their voices most. Harrison laughed, but it was a cold, bitter sound. Held accountable? By you? What makes you think you have the authority to hold anyone accountable for anything? Because you have a talk show? Because you have opinions? Because I use my platform for more than just self-promotion? Whoopi shot back. Because when injustice happens, I don't hide behind some fake humility about not wanting to influence people. Fake humility. Harrison's voice was now dangerously quiet. You think it's fake humility to recognize that being good at pretending to be other people doesn't automatically make me an expert on complex social and political issues. I think it's cowardice disguised as humility, Whoopi said with brutal directness. The word hung in the air like a slap. Even the usually vocal Joy Behar sat in stunned silence as the implications of what Whoopi had just said sank in throughout the studio. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions that would have made for compelling cinema if this weren't real life. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a hurricane. Did you just call me a coward? Whoopi met his gaze without flinching. If the shoe fits. Sonny Hostin gasped audibly. Alyssa Farah Griffin's mouth fell open. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. Even the production crew, usually invisible behind their cameras and equipment, seemed to freeze in place. Harrison took a step closer to the table, his presence suddenly filling the entire studio. Let me tell you something about cowardice, Whoopi. Cowardice is hiding behind a television show to launch personal attacks on people who can't defend themselves properly because they're guests in your house. Cowardice is mistaking cruelty for courage and thinking that being mean-spirited somehow makes you righteous. Don't you lecture me about courage, Whoopi snarled. I've been speaking truth to power for decades while you've been playing make-believe for millions of dollars. And there's the real issue, isn't it? Harrison said, his voice now carrying a clarity that cut through all the noise. This isn't about activism or social justice or using platforms responsibly. This is about your resentment toward people who've achieved success in ways you don't approve of. Whoopi stood up abruptly, matching his energy. My resentment? You think this is about jealousy? You think I'm jealous of some actor who's too scared to take a stand on anything meaningful? I think you're angry that not everyone wants to turn their personal convictions into public theater, Harrison replied. I think you can't stand that some people prefer to do their good work quietly, without fanfare, without needing applause or validation from people like you. People like me? Whoopi's voice cracked with rage. What exactly do you mean by people like me, Harrison? The question carried dangerous undertones that everyone in the studio immediately recognized. Harrison paused, realizing the trap that had been laid for him, but his anger was too far gone to navigate it carefully. I mean, people who have confused having a platform with having wisdom, he said deliberately. People who think that because they have strong opinions and a microphone, everyone else owes them explanations for how they live their lives. Joy tried to jump in. Okay, I think we need to wrap this up and go to commercial. No, Whoopi said, firmly. We're not going to commercial. We're going to finish this conversation. Harrison seems to have a lot to say about how I conduct myself, so let's hear it all. Harrison looked around the table at the other hosts, all of whom appeared to be silently pleading with him to de-escalate. But something in Whoopi's challenge seemed to push him past his breaking point. You want to hear it all, Whoopi? Fine. You've built your entire career on being confrontational and calling it courage. You've made a living out of ambushing guests and calling it accountability. You sit behind this desk every morning throwing stones at people and then act surprised when they don't thank you for it. And you've built your career on playing heroes while being too cowardly to be one in real life. Whoopi countered without hesitation. That was it. The final straw. Harrison Ford, the man who had stared down directors, producers, and Hollywood executives for 5 decades, who had never backed down from a fight when it mattered, reached his absolute limit. You know what, Whoopi? You're right about one thing. I am done being polite about this. You want to know what I really think? I think you're a bully who's mistaken cruelty for righteousness so many times that you can't tell the difference anymore. I think you've forgotten that there's a human being sitting across from you, not just a target for your self-righteous anger. Whoopi's face was flushed with fury, and I think you're exactly what I said you are. A coward who hides behind fake humility because taking a real stand might cost you something. Harrison stared at her for one final, electric moment. Then, with the decisive movement of someone who had made an irreversible decision, he reached down and unclipped his microphone. This interview is over, he announced, his voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge's gavel. You can't just walk out. Whoopi called after him as he moved toward the edge of the set. Harrison turned back one last time, his expression now eerily calm. Watch me. And with that, Harrison Ford walked off the View set, leaving behind a stunned studio, speechless. Hosts, and a television moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The cameras continued rolling as Whoopi sat in shocked silence, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in for everyone involved. The legendary actor had done something unprecedented in daytime television history, and as he disappeared through the studio doors, one thing was absolutely certain. This was a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved. So what did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Harrison Ford go too far, or was Whoopi out of line from the start? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from Hollywood that you won't believe actually happened.